Good morning, class. This is Reader's Workshop. This is where I read to you, and I want you to focus on changing your voice using voice fluctuation when you see punctuation marks. I also want you to focus on the character or characters in the story. How are they? Who are they? What's their purpose in the story? Were they causing the problem? Were they giving a solution? Was there a problem in the story? Before I read to you, I want to go over voice fluctuation, changing your voice when you see punctuation marks. Okay. If you see a period, that means stop, take a breath. If you see an exclamation mark, that means your voice is getting loud or you're yelling, "Happy birthday!" If you see a question mark, you're asking a question and you're waiting for an answer. How are you today? If you see a comma between words, that means stop, take a breath, count to 3, and then continue reading. If you see quotation marks, the words that are inside these marks means that person or thing is doing the talking. Change your voice to that character to make the reading interesting. Now, the story that I'm going to read is a traditional literature, and it's called Paul Revere's Ride. And it was written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Illustrated, that means the pictures, by John Goodell. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 775. Hardly a man is now alive. Who remembers that famous day and year? He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a ladder aloft the belfry, arc for the north church tower as a signal light, one if the land, or two if by sea, and on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex fat village and farm, for the country folks to be up and to arm." So there were certain signals. So if it was 1, the enemy was coming by land. If the light was 2, the enemy was coming by sea, by water. Then he said, "Good night," and with a muffled oar, silently rowed to Charleston town shore, just as the moon rose above over the bay, where the swinging wide at her moorings lay, the Somerset British man of war, the phantom ship, with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide, in the water. Meanwhile his friend, through alley and street, wanders and watches with eager ears, till in silence around him he hears the muster of men and the barrack door, and the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on shore. So here he's telling him the signal of the lantern, 1 or 2, and here, this side, he's rowing his boat to shore, to the beach. Then he climbed to the tower of the Old North Church by the wooden stairs with sleethy thread, and the belfry chamber, belfries up on top of the boat overhead, startled the pigeons, scared the birds from their perch on the somber rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade, up the trembling ladder steep and tall, to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like the sentinel's thread. The watchful night whined as it went creeping along from tent to tent, and seeming to whisper, "All is well." A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts were bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount the ride, booted and spurred with the heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth, and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower on the old North Church. It's like a little tower up on the church where they were going to do the lantern thing, one or two. As it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. And lo, as he looks at the belfry's height, a glimmer of the gleam of the light, he springs to his saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry's burn. So let me go back and go. So if it's 2 lamps, that means they're coming by sea. Here he is, man with the lantern over here. And over here is Paul Revere with his horse. Hurried the hoofs in the village street, a shape of the moonlight, the bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles, passing a spark, struck out in a steed, flying fearless when fleet. That was all, and yet through the glow and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night, and the spark struck out by the steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock of the rooster and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises after the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when they galloped into the Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock, the rooster, the one that spins. It'll tell you if it's windy, north, south, east, west. It'll be in the picture. He saw the gilded weathercock slim to the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting house windows blank and bare gazed at him with a spectral glare, and as if already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge of Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of the birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. Here's Paul Revere over here riding into town, and this is the weathercock they're talking about, the rooster. When it's windy, it tells you what direction, northeast, south, or west. You know the rest in the books you have read, how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball, and behind each fence the farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, the British, then crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so though the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born was the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last. In the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people were awakened to listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of the steed, of the horse, and the midnight passage of Paul Revere. And here he was with his horse running through town, warning the people of the British attack. Now, this is your time for reading, so I would like for you to read to your family or to a relative. If you have nobody to read to, then read to yourself. Remember to look at the punctuation marks and use voice fluctuation. Change the sound of your voice. And also, if you don't have a book to read, then take one of the handouts that's either in class tag or in the district website. So, read, because practice makes perfect. So, until next time, happy reading.